Good morning. Today is the 23rd day of Kislev, the 6th of December. We are up to the fourth reading, of Vayeishev. This is a reading where we hear about Judah's exploits. This is all building up to a meeting between Joseph and Judah. And this is where obviously the concepts of Joseph and Judah both being kings and each one having their own right, ability to be sovereign, to have a kingdom. This ended up becoming, after the reign of Solomon, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Northern kingdom was ruled usually by descendants of Joseph, and the southern kingdom was obviously ruled by Judah. And they both, Joseph and Judah, in parallel, in our Parsha, go through their own series of events that builds them up. And Judah here is going through something very, very difficult, not easy at all. It starts with, at that time, Judah stepped down from his position. He moved away. He was very taken. Took the whole situation with Joseph very poorly, and he decided to, in a sense, strike out on his own. And so he goes to a place in the beginning of the Negev, place called Timnah, and there he meets a what do you call this? A merchant, whose name is Shua. And he marries his daughter, and he has two children with her, Er and Onan. And Er and Onan, they have the same wife. How did that come to happen? That Er, the eldest, when he married this girl, her name is Tamar, and he passes away, he dies. And it says that God killed him because of his iniquities. Then there's a mitzvah, which is called levirate marriage. And Judah's second son, Onan, he now marries Tamar, and the same thing happens to her. Now, halachically, there are things like this. This is actually covered in Jewish law. There are cases in which, and it's usually a type of venereal disease, that causes men to die from a woman. By the way, it could also be the other way around. There are such diseases. We don't suffer from them so much anymore. One of them was like syphilis. There were all kinds of diseases that, because of a marital relationship, people would get sick, and it could be that the host was immune to it, and the men that were with her were not, and so they died. And so after this happens twice, the third time we don't force the man to do levirate marriage, because we say that she must have something. There's something wrong, and we don't want him to risk it. But Judah, for some reason, promises Tamar his third son, whose name is Shelah, and she doesn't end up being wed to him. There's a whole question about how. Remember that this is all happening in the span of 22 years. So the question really is, how old was Shelah? How old was Er and Onan? There was a time between them. In any case, without getting into how we can organize the years, she's not given to Shelah, and she decides that she wants to have a family with Judah's family. So she disguises herself as a prostitute, and she sits on the crossroads. And she waits for Judah. She knows he's going to come by there because he has business going there. And he finds her, and they're together, and she becomes pregnant from him. But he doesn't know that it's her, of course, because she's covering her face. He doesn't know who she is. Unfortunately, that's the way that this usually works. that the man doesn't want to know exactly who he's with. And he goes back home, and she says for payment, he didn't have anything to pay her. He leaves his signet ring and his cloak and his personal items with her, and he says, I'll send you payment later to take back the collateral of his personal items. What happens in the end is that she can't be found, and there's no one to pay, because obviously she wasn't a real prostitute. And Judah is now stuck in this strange situation. And a few months later, he learns that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, who's supposed to be waiting for his youngest son to grow up and marry her, has become pregnant. And so he says, what is that? It's like when she is promised to someone, she's already, in a sense, she is there's what we call Zika in Hebrew. Zika, actually, it's the same name as the virus from Brazil. But it's called Zika. It means there's a connection between them already. It's like being engaged. And so she has committed adultery from engagement. And because she was, Rashi tells us, she's the daughter actually of Shem, the son of Noach, and he's a priest, then she has to be put to death. And she does something incredible, which is that she could have gotten out of it right away. She could have just said, here's the signet ring, and here is the cloak, and this belongs to Judah. It has his name on it. So he would have been completely embarrassed by the situation. But she doesn't do that. The sages learn from this something quite incredible. They say that it's better for a person to be cast into the fiery furnace, into a fiery furnace, and not to embarrass someone else. Because if she would have done that, she would have embarrassed him. So she doesn't embarrass him. She just says, when Judah comes to have the punishment administered to her, she says, can you recognize this? She doesn't say it's his, even though, of course, she knows it's his. She says, can you recognize who this belongs to? And he immediately says, tzadkah, she is right. Ostensibly saying she's more righteous than I am. I promised her my son Shelah. I didn't allow her to marry him because apparently Judah was afraid that Shelah would also die. And she was willing to go and die for the sake of marrying into our family the way she was promised. What is this story about? The story, and the most important part is the end. She has twins, Peretz and Zerach, and Peretz is considered to be the pedigree from which the Messiah comes from. It's a very interesting story here. It's very, very complex and a lot of stuff going on. And in the end, it's supposed to lead to redemption, this whole story. In fact, the sages even say that while Joseph was dealing with Potiphar's wife, and he was dealing with his incarceration in Egypt, and Jacob was mourning for Joseph, and Judah was trying to strike out on his own, everybody was busy with something. God was creating the light of the Messiah. That's the idea behind it. And so we think we're going about all these important things, and what we call Mashiach, later they come to this very important statement, Mashiach comes behesech hadat, when we don't notice. I'll say something about that towards the end. The sages say there are three things that come when you don't notice them: something you lost, a scorpion, and Messiah. These three things, they have to come when you don't try to bring them. They happen by themselves, as it were. The important part here is Tamar's name. Tamar, the way that it's interpreted, means the end of bitterness. Tam-mar is also how you it's also how you write her name. I'm just checking that I'm saying no, the way her name is written. It's like two separate syllables. Tamar. And what it's saying is, the end, tam means the end, and mar means bitter. The end of bitterness. Tamar is also the name of a date palm. When I was younger, I thought that when you picture a desert island and somebody's stuck on a desert on an island in the middle of the ocean. So usually, how do you draw it? So they draw a little island, and it's always got like a tree growing out of it. And I thought that was a date palm. It's actually a coconut tree. Coconut trees apparently do the same thing, but date palms are even better. And what do? In fact, the date palm, because of this, is called the king of the trees. And we'll talk about this in a moment, exactly what the purpose of a tree is. But Tamar is also the name of the date palm. And the date palm also puts an end to bitterness. The idea being that the salt water is bitter. If you've been in the ocean, you know it's not just salty, it's bitter. And the date palm is able to take that type of water, drink it as it were, and turn it into sweetness. So coconuts, they're a fruit, but they're not as sweet as dates. And dates, in a certain sense, they're the sweetest fruit, and the best place to grow date palms is in a bitter location, where the waters are not sweet. If you've been to the Jordan Valley in the land of Israel, so you see that all through the Jordan Valley, and especially to the south, meaning around the Dead Sea, there are groves and groves of date palms. They grow wonderfully there. In fact, they grow everywhere in the Middle East. But that's one of the places where they grow the best. And they grow that way is because they take the bitterness and they transform it into sweetness. And so they transform it into dates, which are so sweet. This is what Tamar did. In a long and windy way, she was able to take Judah's hubris, his feeling that he should have been better, he should have done better, and he's very angry at what happened with Joseph, because in the end he wasn't able to act the part of the responsible adult, the leader, the king, and everything fell apart. He wasn't able to do what he was supposed to, and his hubris leads him to go and seek his fortune somewhere else apart from the entire family. What Tamar does is she turns him around. The wisdom of this woman was to take his hubris and turn it around. And what did she do? She got him to admit, and that is the most important part of turning hubris around, is that the person admits that he's wrong. And interestingly, the sages say, when he said, she is more just than I am, tzadka mimeni, they say, mimeni, from me, wasn't something that Judah said, because it would have been enough for him to say tzadka, she was right, she's just. Mimeni says God is saying, it's all from me. Her ability here to turn Judah around, to get him to admit to what's wrong with him and what is incorrect, that came from me. And she was successful in this. And so she is the master of churning the bitter into the sweet. Now, churning something bitter into something sweet, in Wonders you'll read it, you'll see it's much longer than what I just described. It has to do with what Reb Nachman of Breslov calls the worlds of transformation. There are worlds of transformation in our imagination. Meaning, what he says is that what we call the evil inclination is really our imagination. Our imagination takes the reality and transforms it into something negative. Whereas really, reality, if we would look at it properly, we would see that it is actually not something negative. It's not what we think it is. He says this specifically in the context of when a person has negative thoughts. He says the negative thoughts that we have, they're our imagination preying on us and taking apart our reality, putting it back together in an imaginary way. And remember, Rav Nachman lived a long time before movies. But you see that what happens in the media, what happens in movies, everything that's done is to rearrange the world in such a way that there's a negative message. So that's just an example of it. But our minds are conditioned to do that a lot. And the only way you can get out of that is to retransform everything. And that's what Tamar did. Her name also means not just an end to bitterness, but also transformation. Because the word Tamar leads into another word called Tumura. Tumura means transformation. It's actually, I don't know if there's a connection, I don't think there is. But if you think about it a little bit, transformation and Timura, they almost have the same consonants. I mean, they have the same consonants. They're just said a little bit differently. So this whole topic, says Reb Nachman, in our generation is that in order to sweeten the bitter, and the bitter is not really bitter, it's just a transformation that's happened in our minds and has led us to think negative thoughts, you have to have this quality of Tamar, being able to retransform it. Classically, the way this is done is in Hebrew, that you think about the word that you're thinking of, and you can always rearrange the letters to make it into something positive. And that's called the Tmura, that's called the rearrangement of letters, one of the most important techniques in Kabbalah, of taking a word and rearranging it. The one that's most famous is Et Sarai leYaakov u'mimena yivashea. It is a time of calamity for Jacob, and from it he will be saved. What do you mean from it? Says the Baal Shem Tov, you take the word tzara, calamity, you rearrange the letters, you get tzohar. You get a window of opportunity. The calamity becomes a window. We actually talked about this in Parshat Noach, I think, because we were talking about the window that God commanded Noach to make at the top of the ark, and which let in light. But that word is also the same letters as tzara, as a calamity. And actually that window was what turned the calamity of the flood into an opportunity for Noach, into something positive. So this all has to do with Tamar. She's the hero of this reading, and she has the wisdom of turning what was a terrible situation into something that leads to the coming of Messiah. I mentioned that at the end I'll say something about what does it mean that Messiah comes when you do not notice, when you do not pay attention. There's many interpretations that have been given over the generations. I believe that the one that comes out of Hasidic thinking is that Messiah comes for each person individually also when we stop paying attention to ourselves, when we stop seeing ourselves as a center of reality. That is what we need to stop noticing. We have to stop noticing ourselves so much and start looking at what needs to be done in the world, what we can contribute to the world. And that change, that is the coming of Messiah, is himself on a personal level. That every person that way finds the Messiah within him. Thanks for joining. I hope to see you tomorrow.